The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal towers of Zenthari Prime, as students from across the galaxy hurried to their classes at the prestigious Galactic Xenobiology Institute. Among the rushing crowd were beings of all shapes and sizes, tall, thin Rigelians with their flowing tentacles, stocky vegan traders with their thick shells, and graceful Altarians whose wings caught the light like prisms. Professor Kethvar stood at the front of Lecture Hall 7, his crystalline body reflecting the morning light in beautiful patterns across the walls. His multiple eye stalks moved independently as he watched his students file in, each one taking their specially designed seats that accommodated their unique anatomies. The professor's reputation preceded him. He was considered one of the galaxy's leading experts on dangerous planetary flora, and his advanced toxic flora studies course was both feared and respected throughout the academic community. "Good morning, class," Kethvar said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's translation systems. Each student heard his words in their native language, though some concepts would prove harder to translate than others. "Today we begin our study of the most dangerous planet known to galactic science, the third planet of the Sol system, which its inhabitants call Earth." A collective shiver ran through the classroom. Earth had become legendary in xenobiological circles. Though few beings had ever seen a human in person, the planet was classified as a death world, a rare type of planet where life somehow managed to exist, despite conditions that would kill most galactic species within hours. Behind the main lecture hall, separated by thick transparent aluminum walls, was the observation deck. This area was reserved for visiting scholars and researchers who wanted to observe the Institute's famous teaching methods without disrupting the classes. Today only one figure sat in the observation area, a human woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez. Sarah was part of the first human cultural exchange program, a historic initiative that had taken 3 years of negotiations between Earth's government and the Galactic Federation. She was officially there to study alien teaching methods for her research on comparative education systems. What the aliens didn't know was that she was also there to quietly correct any major misconceptions about human biology and culture, and there were many. Sarah adjusted her comfortable position in the specially modified chair and pulled out her tablet to take notes. She had been looking forward to this particular lecture series ever since she had seen the course description. As a botanist who specialized in cultivated food crops, she was curious to see what the galaxy's experts thought they knew about Earth's plant life. Professor Kethvar activated the holographic display system, and a 3-dimensional image of Earth appeared in the center of the classroom. The blue and green planet rotated slowly, looking peaceful and beautiful. Several students gasped at the sight. They had heard about Earth's infamous reputation, but seeing it like this made it hard to believe such a lovely world could be so deadly. "Do not be fooled by its appearance," Kethvar warned, noticing his students' reactions. "This planet harbors some of the most lethal flora in the known galaxy. Today we will focus on what I consider to be Earth's most dangerous plant-based toxin, what humans call the death fruit." The hologram changed to show a small, wrinkled red object that looked almost innocent. It was roughly triangular in shape, with a pointed end that seemed to glow with an inner fire. The professor's eye stalks focused on the image with what could only be described as academic fascination, mixed with horror. "This," he announced dramatically, "is the Carolina Reaper, known in xenobiological circles as Capsicum mortalis. The name alone should tell you everything you need to know about its deadly nature." Sarah nearly choked on the water she was drinking. She quickly covered her mouth to muffle any sound, but she couldn't help smiling. The dramatic way the professor was presenting what she knew as a particularly hot chili pepper was both amusing and somewhat flattering to her species' reputation. A Rigelian student raised one of her tentacles. "Professor, how do humans survive on a planet where such weapons grow naturally?" Kethvar's crystalline features seemed to darken with concern. "That, Zilandra, is one of the great mysteries of human biology. Our research suggests that humans have developed extraordinary tolerance to toxins that would kill most of us instantly. The death fruit contains a compound called capsaicin, which triggers what humans call heat, though this is not actual thermal energy, but rather a chemical reaction that causes cellular combustion of the oral cavity. The translation system struggled with some of these concepts, causing confused buzzing and clicking sounds from various students as they tried to understand terms like spicy and hot sauce. that had no equivalent in their languages. A young, canid student, his wolf-like features twisted with worry, asked, "But Professor, how do they harvest these death fruits without dying? Do they wear protective suits?" "Excellent question, Growlpack," the professor replied, clearly warming to his subject. "Our intelligence suggests that humans have developed elaborate rituals around the handling of death fruits. They use special containers to store them, and they often consume them in group settings, possibly as part of warrior bonding ceremonies." Sarah was taking careful notes, not about the lecture content, but about the misconceptions she would need to address later. She made a mental note to prepare a cultural presentation about human cuisine that might help clear up some of these dramatic misunderstandings. The hologram shifted again, showing what appeared to be a human kitchen. The professor pointed to various common items: a cutting board, a knife, some bowls, and described them as if they were specialized laboratory equipment designed for handling dangerous materials. "Notice the precise preparation methods," Kethavar continued. "The human carefully segments the death fruit using what appears to be a ceremonial blade. The seeds are often preserved separately, possibly for ritual purposes or to create more concentrated toxins." A vegan student's shell plates rattled nervously. "Professor, surely no being would willingly consume such a substance." The professor's eye stalk swiveled to focus on the student. But that is where human biology becomes truly remarkable. Not only do they consume death fruits, but our research suggests they have turned this necessity into a form of cultural expression. They appear to rank different death fruits by their toxicity levels and actually compete to consume the most dangerous varieties. The classroom fell silent except for the soft humming of the environmental systems. The concept was so alien to most of the students that they struggled to process it. A few of the more sensitive species had to activate their personal air filtration systems, just thinking about such toxic exposure. Sarah glanced at her watch and realized it was almost lunchtime. She quietly opened her bag and pulled out her lunch container, being careful not to make any noise that might disturb the class below. She had packed one of her favorite meals, leftover chili from the batch she had made the night before, along with some homemade cornbread and a small bag of her grandmother's special dried pepper chips. As she arranged her meal, Sarah continued listening to the professor's increasingly dramatic description of human survival, mechanisms, and toxin resistance training. She made another note to definitely request some time to give a guest lecture. These misconceptions were entertaining, but they might cause problems if other species continued to view basic human food as weapons of mass destruction. The lecture was just getting started, and Sarah had a feeling it was going to be a very interesting day. Professor Kethavar's enthusiasm for his subject grew with each passing minute. His crystalline body seemed to pulse with excitement as he delved deeper into what he believed to be the darkest secrets of human survival. The holographic display cycled through images of various peppers, each one looking more sinister than the last in the dramatic lighting the professor had chosen. "Class, what you are about to learn will challenge everything you thought you knew about the limits of biological adaptation," Kethavar announced, his multiple eye stalks focusing on different sections of his audience to gauge their reactions. "The death fruits of Earth come in hundreds of varieties, each one more lethal than the last." The hologram shifted to show a ghost pepper, its pale, wrinkled surface making it look almost diseased. Several students in the front row actually moved their chairs backward. "This specimen is known as the Butjolokia, or as humans call it, the ghost pepper," the professor continued, savoring the dramatic effect his words had on the class. "The name itself tells us much about human culture. They associate this death fruit with spirits of the dead, suggesting that consumption may actually cause temporary death experiences or visions of the afterlife." A Zenthari student raised her hand, her own crystalline features flickering with nervous energy. "Professor, are you suggesting that humans use these death fruits for religious purposes?" Kethavar nodded gravely. "Our research strongly suggests this, yes. Humans appear to have built entire spiritual practices around the consumption of these toxins. They speak of feeling the burn and seeing stars, clearly references to mystical experiences brought on by controlled poisoning." In the observation deck above, Sarah had to bite her lip to keep from laughing out loud. She opened her thermos of homemade chili, and the rich aroma immediately filled her small space. The smell reminded her of home, of Sunday dinners with her family, of her grandmother teaching her the secret to the perfect blend of spices. of cozy winter evenings when a bowl of hot chili was exactly what everyone needed. Back in the classroom, the professor was warming to his theme. But the ghost pepper is not even close to the most dangerous variety. Humans have somehow managed to cultivate death fruits that exceed the toxicity levels of known chemical weapons. The hologram changed again, showing a Carolina Reaper in all its bumpy red glory. This time, the professor had added special effects. Small flames seemed to dance around the image, and warning symbols flashed in multiple galactic languages. "Behold the Carolina Reaper," Kethvar said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "This particular death fruit measures over 2 million units on the Scoville scale, a human measurement system that appears to be designed specifically for ranking toxins by their lethality." A Rigelian student's tentacles began to twitch nervously. "Professor, what happens to a human who consumes this weapon?" The professor's expression became even more serious. "According to our research, humans who consume the Carolina Reaper experience what they call mouth fire, a sensation so intense it can cause temporary blindness, uncontrollable weeping, and complete loss of rational thought. Their skin changes color, they begin to perspire profusely, and they often make sounds that our translators cannot properly interpret, though we believe these may be battle cries or death chants." The class sat in stunned silence. Even the usually chatty Altarians had stopped their soft chirping conversations. The concept of voluntarily experiencing such torment was completely alien to species that had evolved on worlds where survival meant avoiding anything remotely dangerous. "But, Professor," a young Canid student asked, his ears flattened against his head in distress, "why would any intelligent species do this to themselves?" Kethavar's eye stalk swiveled thoughtfully. "This brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of human culture," growled Pak. "Humans appear to use death fruit consumption as a form of social bonding and hierarchy establishment. They gather in groups to witness each other's consumption of these toxins, cheering and recording the experience. We believe this serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates individual strength, builds group unity through shared trauma, and possibly serves as training for their warrior class." Sarah nearly choked on her chili. The professor was describing a typical hot sauce challenge video on social media, as if it were some kind of ancient tribal ritual. She made another note about the urgent need for cultural education programs. The professor activated a new hologram, showing what appeared to be a human grocery store. To the alien students, it must have looked like an armory. Rows upon rows of bottles filled with various colored liquids lined the shelves, each one labeled with names that the translation systems rendered as things like death sauce, liquid fire, and Satan's blood. "As you can see," Kethavar continued, "humans have industrialized the production of death fruit extracts. They create concentrated toxins in liquid form and make them widely available to their population. Our sociologists believe this may be part of their species' preparation for interstellar warfare. By constantly exposing themselves to chemical weapons, they build immunity that would give them a significant advantage in combat situations." A vegan trader in the back of the class made a sound like grinding rocks. "Professor, surely their government regulates such dangerous substances." The professor's crystalline features actually began to glow slightly, a sign of extreme academic excitement in his species. "This is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of all, Kliktar. Not only are these death fruit extracts unregulated, but humans actively compete to create more potent varieties. They hold contests to see who can develop the most toxic combinations, and they award prizes for the most creative ways to inflict this suffering upon themselves and others." The classroom erupted in a buzz of concerned conversation. Students turned to each other, speaking in hushed tones in dozens of different languages. The universal translation system was working overtime, but the emotional content was clear regardless of language. Pure bewilderment at human behavior. Above them in the observation deck, Sarah was enjoying her lunch immensely. Her chili was perfectly spiced, hot enough to give her that pleasant warming sensation she loved, but not so hot that she couldn't taste all the other flavors her grandmother had taught her to layer into the recipe. The beef was tender, the beans were perfectly cooked, and the blend of peppers created a complex heat that built slowly and comfortably. She glanced down at the agitated students below and felt a mix of amusement and sympathy. Their professor was clearly well-intentioned and genuinely interested in human culture. but he had obviously never had access to actual humans to interview. All his research appeared to be based on second-hand observations and wild speculation. As Sarah reached for her bag of dried pepper chips, a snack she had, made by dehydrating some mild jalapeno slices, she wondered how these aliens would react if they knew she considered her current meal to be comfort food, not a form of self-torture. The gap between perception and reality was so wide it was almost comical. The lecture was only getting more dramatic, and Sarah realized she might need to intervene sooner than she had planned. The atmosphere in Lecture Hall 7 had grown increasingly tense as Professor Kethvar continued his presentation. His crystalline body now pulsed with an urgent glow, and his multiple eye stalks moved with sharp, agitated movements as he prepared to reveal what he considered to be his most important research findings. Students, what I am about to share with you represents 3 years of intensive study, the professor announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone about to reveal a terrible truth. I have developed a comprehensive theory about how humans have managed to survive on their death world, and I must warn you, the implications are disturbing. The holographic display shifted to show a complex diagram that looked like a cross between a food web and a military strategy chart. Arrows connected various images of peppers to symbols representing human activities, creating what appeared to be an elaborate survival system. I propose that humans have developed what I call the Toxin Adaptation Protocol, Kethvar began, his voice taking on the tone of a scholar presenting groundbreaking research. From birth, human offspring are gradually exposed to death fruit toxins in increasing concentrations. This process, which they call building tolerance, is actually a form of biological warfare training that begins in infancy. A horrified gasp came from Zilandra, the Rigelian student. Her tentacles had gone completely pale, a sure sign of distress in her species. Professor, are you saying they poison their own children? Kethavar's expression became even more grave. I'm afraid the evidence supports this conclusion. Humans have developed numerous delivery methods for introducing these toxins to their young. They disguise death fruit extracts in what they call food, creating elaborate meals that serve as both sustenance and poison training. They even have special occasions dedicated to this practice, events they call family dinners, where multiple generations gather to consume increasingly dangerous toxin combinations. The class sat in stunned silence. The concept was so alien to species that protected their young from any possible harm that several students were showing signs of physical distress. A couple of the more empathetic species had activated their emotional regulation systems to prevent themselves from becoming overwhelmed. In the observation deck, Sarah had finished her chili and was now enjoying her grandmother's dried pepper chips. These were made from ghost peppers that had been carefully dehydrated and lightly salted, a family recipe that had been passed down for 3 generations. To Sarah, they were a perfect snack, crispy and flavorful with just enough heat to be interesting. The familiar taste brought back memories of helping her grandmother in the kitchen, learning about spices and cooking techniques that had been refined over decades of loving experimentation. She crunched quietly on the chips while listening to the professor's increasingly elaborate theories about human society. Each bite released a small puff of aromatic pepper dust into the air around her, but the observation deck's air filtration system was designed to handle much more significant contamination than a few food particles. Back in the classroom, Professor Kethvar was building toward his grand conclusion. But the toxin adaptation protocol is just the beginning, he continued, his crystalline features now glowing bright enough to cast shadows on the walls. I believe humans have developed an entire warrior culture based around death fruit consumption. They hold ritual competitions called hot sauce challenges where individuals compete to consume the most lethal toxins while their tribe members watch and record the experience. The hologram changed to show what appeared to be a human restaurant, but Kethvar presented it as if it were a training facility. These establishments, which humans call Thai restaurants and Indian restaurants, are actually specialized warrior training centers. They offer different levels of toxin exposure, allowing humans to gradually build their resistance while socializing with other members of their warrior class. A young Altarian spread her prismatic wings in agitation. Professor, this sounds like an entire civilization built around suffering. How do they maintain their population if everyone is constantly being poisoned? Kethvar nodded approvingly at the question. An excellent observation, Fluttersong. This is where human biology becomes truly remarkable. They have not only adapted to survive death fruit toxins, but they have actually developed a form of addiction to them. Humans who regularly consume these poisons report experiencing cravings when they go too long without exposure. Their bodies have learned to associate the cellular damage with pleasure sensations. The professor activated a new display showing brain scans that he had somehow obtained from human medical databases. As you can see, when humans consume death fruits, their neural activity spikes dramatically. Areas associated with pain processing light up like stellar explosions, but simultaneously, their pleasure centers activate as well. They have literally rewired their brains to enjoy self-inflicted chemical torture. Sarah paused in her snacking, genuinely impressed despite herself. The professor had actually managed to find some real research about capsaicin's effects on human neurology, though his interpretation was characteristically dramatic. It was true that spicy foods triggered both pain and pleasure responses, and that people could develop preferences for increasingly hot foods over time. The professor had just framed it in the most alarming way possible. A candid student raised his paw nervously. "Professor, what about the humans who cannot adapt to this toxin training? What happens to them?" Kethvar's expression became solemn. "Our research suggests that humans who cannot tolerate death fruit consumption are relegated to lower positions in their social hierarchy. They are often mocked with terms like lightweight and can't handle the heat, which appear to be serious insults in human culture. Some are even excluded from important social gatherings where death fruit consumption is required." Sarah nearly laughed out loud at this interpretation of teasing someone for not liking spicy food. She made a mental note to explain the concept of good-natured ribbing when she eventually gave her cultural presentation. The professor was now pacing back and forth in front of his holographic display, clearly excited by his own theories. But perhaps most remarkably of all, humans have learned to extract pleasure not just from consuming death fruits themselves, but from watching others experience the toxin effects. They create and share recordings of death fruit consumption, often focusing on the most extreme reactions. This suggests a level of psychological adaptation that goes beyond mere physical tolerance. A vegan student made us sound like grinding stone. "Professor, this sounds like a form of psychological warfare as well as biological warfare." "Precisely," Kethvar exclaimed, his eye stalks swiveling to focus on the student. "Humans have weaponized their own suffering. By building tolerance to toxins that would incapacitate most galactic species, they have created a form of biological superiority. Any species attempting to use chemical weapons against humans would find their efforts largely ineffective." The class was now buzzing with nervous energy. Students were whispering to each other in their native languages, and the translation systems were working overtime to keep up with dozens of simultaneous conversations. The general mood seemed to be a mixture of academic fascination and genuine fear. Sarah finished her pepper chips and brushed the crumbs from her hands. The slight tingling sensation on her fingertips was pleasant, just enough capsaicin residue to create a gentle warming effect. She glanced at her watch and realized she still had time for the rest of her lunch. She pulled out her thermos of coffee, which she had spiced with a small amount of cinnamon and a tiny pinch of cayenne pepper, a combination her grandmother had taught her that added warmth and complexity to the flavor. As she unscrewed the thermos cap, Sarah wondered how the professor would interpret her coffee recipe, probably as some kind of liquid courage consumed before battle. Knowing his tendency toward dramatic interpretations, the lecture was reaching new heights of creative speculation, and Sarah realized that her quiet lunch was about to become much more interesting. The lecture hall's environmental systems had been quietly working throughout Professor Kethvar's presentation, maintaining perfect atmospheric conditions for the diverse mix of species in attendance. The air filtration units hummed softly in the background, processing and recycling the breathing mixtures needed by dozens of different alien physiologies. It was a complex system, designed to handle everything from the methane-rich atmosphere preferred by the Titan colonists to the high oxygen environment needed by the Altarians. What the system was not designed for, however, was the gradual accumulation of capsaicin particles from Sarah's lunch in the observation deck above. Sarah had just opened her thermos of spiced coffee when the first sign of trouble appeared. Growlpack, the young Canid student sitting near the back of the classroom, suddenly lifted his wolf-like snout and began sniffing the air with obvious concern. His ears perked up and swiveled as he tried to locate the source of what his sensitive nose was detecting. Professor HFY was still deep in his presentation, now showing a holographic recreation of what he believed to be a human death fruit preparation ritual, actually just someone making salsa in their kitchen, but presented with the dramatic lighting and ominous music that the professor felt appropriate for such a dangerous activity. As you can see, HFY continued, oblivious to his students' distress, the human carefully combines multiple varieties of death fruit with other toxic substances. Note the addition of what appears to be acid, likely vinegar or citric compounds designed to increase the destructive potential of the mixture. Growlpack's sniffing became more agitated. He turned to the Rigelian student next to him, his ears flat against his head in the universal canid expression of worry. "Zelandra," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the professor's lecture. "Do you smell that?" The Rigelian's tentacles began to twitch as she activated her own chemical detection systems. Unlike mammals, Rigelians could analyze molecular compositions through specialized organs in their tentacles, a ability that had evolved to help them avoid the numerous toxic organisms on their homeworld. Within seconds, her pale purple coloring began to shift toward a warning shade of deep violet. "By the ancient depths," she breathed, her tentacles now writhing in obvious distress. "There are capsaicin compounds in the air. Death fruit toxins are being released. In this very room." The alarm spread quickly through the classroom as other chemically sensitive species began to detect the microscopic traces of pepper compounds that were slowly circulating through the air system. A group of vegan students near the middle of the room began to activate their personal air filtration masks, their shell plates rattling with nervous energy. Professor HFY paused in his lecture, his multiple eye stalks swiveling to observe the growing commotion among his students. "Class, please maintain your attention. I know this material is disturbing, but it is important that we understand." "Professor," Growlpack interrupted, something that would normally be considered extremely rude in canid culture. "There are death fruit toxins in the air. The environmental systems must be compromised." The professor's crystalline features flickered with confusion, then alarm as he processed what his student was saying. He activated his own chemical sensors, designed to detect hazardous substances in laboratory environments. Within moments, his body began to glow with the bright warning colors that indicated extreme danger. "Evacuation protocol," he announced, his voice rising in pitch as panic set in. "All students activate personal protective systems immediately. There has been a catastrophic breach of containment." The classroom erupted in chaos as students of various species scrambled to protect themselves from what they believed to be a deadly chemical attack. Altarians spread their wings and rose toward the ceiling, trying to get away from the ground-level contamination. Rigelians wrapped their tentacles around themselves in protective coils. The vegan students retracted into their shells, and the few atmospheric breathers in the class began frantically adjusting their personal life support systems. In the midst of this pandemonium, someone finally thought to look up toward the observation deck, where the smell seemed to be strongest. It was Zelandra who first spotted the source of their terror, a lone figure sitting calmly in the observation area, apparently completely unaware of the chaos below. "Professor," she screamed, her tentacles pointing upward. "There's someone in the observation deck." Every eye, stalk, sensor, and optical organ in the classroom turned toward the transparent aluminum barrier that separated the observation area from the main lecture hall. Through the clear material, they could see Dr. Sarah Martinez sitting peacefully in her chair, a steaming cup in her hands, completely oblivious to the panic she had inadvertently caused. Professor HFY activated the emergency zoom function on the classroom's visual systems, and suddenly Sarah's image was projected in holographic detail for everyone to see. She was taking a careful sip from her thermos, her face showing the slight flush that comes from enjoying a properly spiced beverage. A small container sat open beside her, and the remnants of what appeared to be red food particles were visible on a napkin. The classroom fell dead silent except for the whimpering of a few younger students and the continued humming of overtaxed air filtration systems. "By all the sacred crystals of Zenthari," Professor HFY whispered, his voice barely functioning through his translator. That's a human. And she's consuming death fruits. Right now. Willingly. Sarah, finally noticing that something was happening in the classroom below, looked down to see dozens of alien faces staring up at her in what appeared to be absolute terror. She waved cheerfully and held up her thermos in a friendly gesture, completely misunderstanding the situation. To the aliens below, this appeared to be a casual salute with a container of concentrated toxins. A young Altarian student fainted, her prismatic wings folding as she dropped to the floor. Two Rigelians caught her before she could hit the ground, but their own tentacles were shaking so badly they could barely maintain their grip. She's actually doing it, Growlpack stammered, his wolf-like features twisted in horrified fascination. She's performing the death fruit consumption ritual, and she's not even wearing protective equipment. Professor Kethvar's academic mind was struggling to process what he was witnessing. All his research, all his theories about human toxin adaptation and warrior culture were suddenly being demonstrated in real time by an actual human. But the reality was somehow both more and less dramatic than he had imagined. Sarah appeared completely calm. There were no signs of the agonizing pain that his research suggested should accompany death fruit consumption. She wasn't screaming, wasn't showing obvious signs of cellular damage, wasn't performing any of the dramatic rituals he had theorized must accompany such dangerous activities. She was just drinking coffee and looking mildly confused about why everyone was staring at her. This changes everything, the professor breathed, his scientific excitement beginning to overcome his fear. We're witnessing actual human toxin consumption behavior in a natural setting. This is the discovery of a lifetime. Several students were now recording the event, their various devices capturing what they believed to be historic footage of human survival techniques in action. Others were backing toward the exits, preparing to flee if the situation became any more dangerous. Sarah, still unclear about what was happening but starting to suspect it might have something to do with her lunch, decided it was time to make contact. Sarah reached over to the communication panel beside her chair, the same system that visiting scholars used to ask questions during lectures. The soft chime that indicated an incoming transmission from the observation deck caused every being in the classroom to freeze in terror. To them, it sounded like the warning signal of an impending catastrophe. "Hello down there," Sarah said cheerfully, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems to every corner of the lecture hall. "I'm Dr. Sarah Martinez from Earth. I couldn't help but notice that everyone seems a bit upset. Is everything all right?" The silence that followed was so complete that the only sounds were the humming of air, circulation systems, and the distant whimpering of a few students who were still convinced they were about to witness a human death ritual. Professor Kethvar was the first to recover his composure, though his crystalline features were still flickering with nervous energy. As a scholar, his curiosity was beginning to overcome his fear. This was, after all, the first opportunity any member of the Institute had ever had to speak directly with a human being. "Dr. Martinez," he said, his voice carefully controlled despite his obvious excitement. We are honored by your presence. I am Professor Kethvar, and I have been lecturing about Earth's dangerous flora. We detected death fruit toxins in our air system, and we were concerned for your safety." Sarah blinked in confusion, then glanced down at her thermos and the empty container that had held her pepper chips. Understanding dawned on her face, followed immediately by barely controlled laughter. "Oh my goodness," she said, trying to keep her voice serious and professional despite her amusement. "You're talking about capsaicin, aren't you?" "From chili peppers?" "Death fruits, yes," Professor Kethvar confirmed gravely. "We observed you consuming what appeared to be concentrated toxin preparations. Are you currently experiencing distress? Do you require medical assistance?" Sarah couldn't help herself. She laughed, a warm, genuine sound that the translation system somehow managed to convey to every species in the room. To the aliens, laughter was a concept they understood, but hearing it from someone they believed to be undergoing chemical torture was deeply confusing. "Professor, I think there's been a wonderful misunderstanding," Sarah said, still smiling broadly. "What you call death fruits, we call chili peppers, and they're just food. Delicious food, actually. I was having lunch, nothing more dramatic than that." The classroom erupted in confused chatter as students turned to each other, trying to process this information. The translation systems were working overtime as dozens of different languages tried to find equivalents for concepts like enjoying spicy food and Eating for pleasure rather than survival. A Rigelian. Student raised a trembling tentacle. Dr. Martinez, are you saying that you consumed those toxins for enjoyment? Absolutely, Sarah replied, holding up her thermos. This is coffee with a tiny bit of cinnamon and cayenne pepper, just enough to add warmth and flavor. And earlier I had some dried ghost pepper chips that my grandmother makes. They're a family recipe. Professor Keithvar's multiple eye stalks were now focused entirely on Sarah, with laser-like intensity. His academic mind was racing as years of research and theory suddenly shifted to accommodate this new information. Dr. Martinez, he said slowly, are you suggesting that humans consume deathfar? Chili peppers not for survival training or ritual purposes, but simply because you find them pleasant? That's exactly what I'm saying, Sarah confirmed. Humans have been eating spicy food for thousands of years because we like the way it tastes. The heat sensation is enjoyable for most of us, though everyone has different tolerance levels. Some people prefer mild flavors, others like things extremely hot. It's just a matter of personal preference. A young candid student who had been recording the entire exchange raised his paw nervously, but Dr. Martinez, our professor, explained that death fruits cause cellular combustion and temporary insanity. How do you survive such effects? Sarah paused, trying to think of how to explain the concept of spicy food to beings who had no cultural context for it. Well, capsaicin, the compound that makes peppers hot, does trigger pain receptors in our mouths, but it doesn't actually cause damage. It just feels like heat. Our brains release endorphins in response, which makes us feel good. It's similar to the feeling some species get from exercise or music. The professor's crystalline body was now pulsing with excited energy as he realized the implications of what he was learning. Dr. Martinez, would you be willing to demonstrate this consumption process for educational purposes? I believe my students would benefit greatly from observing actual human feeding behavior. Sarah glanced down at her remaining lunch supplies and grinned. This was exactly the kind of cultural exchange opportunity she had hoped for when she applied for the program. I'd be happy to, she said, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small container. I have some mild jalapeno slices here. These are on the very low end of what most humans would consider spicy. Would you like to see me eat one? The entire classroom held its collective breath as Sarah opened the container and selected a single slice of pepper. To the aliens watching, it looked like she was casually picking up a piece of concentrated chemical weapon with her bare fingers. Now, watch carefully, Sarah said in her best teaching voice, because I want you to see that this is completely normal human behavior. I'm not preparing for battle. I'm not performing a ritual, and I'm not trying to build toxin resistance. I'm just having a snack. She popped the jalapeno slice into her mouth and chewed it thoughtfully, her expression showing mild enjoyment rather than agony. After swallowing, she smiled and took a sip of her coffee. See? No screaming, no cellular combustion, no temporary insanity. Just a pleasant, mild warming sensation, and a nice flavor that goes well with my coffee. A vegan student's shell plates were chattering with what appeared to be amazement rather than fear. Dr. Martinez, are you saying that all of Professor Keithvar's research about human warrior culture and toxin adaptation protocols is incorrect? Sarah tried to phrase her response diplomatically. Professor Keithvar has done impressive work with limited information, but yes, I'm afraid there are some misconceptions about human culture that I'd love to help clear up. We don't eat spicy food to prepare for war. We eat it because it tastes good and because it's an important part of many human cultures and traditions. Professor Keithvar was frantically taking notes, his academic excitement now completely overwhelming his fear. Dr. Martinez, would you consider giving a guest lecture to our students? I believe we have much to learn about actual human dietary practices. I would love to, Sarah replied. In fact, if the Institute has cooking facilities, I could demonstrate how humans prepare spicy foods. Maybe we could start with something very mild. Perhaps a simple tomato salsa with just a tiny amount of jalapeno. Think of it as Introduction to Human Cuisine 101. The suggestion caused another wave of excited chatter throughout the classroom. Students who had been cowering in fear just minutes earlier were now leaning forward eagerly, their scientific curiosity overcoming their terror. A young Altarian raised her wing tentatively. Dr. Martinez, would it be safe for non-humans to observe such food preparation? We wouldn't want to be accidentally exposed to dangerous concentrations. Sarah laughed again, the sound now familiar and oddly comforting to her alien audience. I promise you, preparing mild salsa is one of the safest activities in the galaxy. The biggest danger would be accidentally cutting yourself with a knife, which is a risk in any kitchen regardless of what you're cooking. Professor Kethvar was already making plans, his crystalline features glowing brightly with enthusiasm. This could revolutionize our understanding of human culture. Dr. Martinez, when would you be available to begin these demonstrations? How about tomorrow? Sarah suggested. I'll bring ingredients for a very mild salsa, and maybe some basic cornbread. Nothing that would even register on what humans consider the spice scale. Think of it as cross-cultural education through food. As the class period came to an end, students were buzzing with excitement rather than terror. They had witnessed something unprecedented. Actual human behavior that contradicted everything. They thought they knew about Earth's most dangerous species. Professor Kethvar was already planning to completely revise his curriculum. His research on deathfruit warrior culture would need to be reframed as human culinary traditions and recreational capsaicin consumption. It wasn't quite as dramatic, but it was infinitely more accurate. Sarah packed up her lunch supplies, smiling as she watched the animated discussions taking place in the classroom below. Tomorrow's cooking demonstration would be the beginning of what she hoped would be a long and productive cultural exchange program. Though she did make a mental note to start with, something even milder than jalapenos. Perhaps bell peppers would be a better introduction to human vegetables for beings who considered black pepper to be a dangerous substance. The misunderstanding had been hilarious, but she was looking forward to building real bridges between human and alien cultures, one meal at a time.